ICQ Podcast episode 394, Working with SMDs. Well, hello fellow amateur radio enthusiasts, and welcome to this 394th episode of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast, supported by our monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode, we join Martin M1MRB, Chris, Mike Zero, Tango Charlie Hotel, Martin, Mike Zero, Sierra Golf Lima, Frank, Kilo 4, Foxtrot Mike Hotel, and Leslie, Golf Zero, Charlie India Bravo, to discuss the latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BRY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode, our feature is Working with SMDs. Well, as always, we'd like to thank our monthly and subscription donors for helping us pay our way and keeping, our bills paid on the internet, etc. And we would ask you to consider doing the same if you found value from the show that you've listened to today. So all we ask you to do is to turn that value into a financial figure and go to icqpodcast.com/donate, where there's lots of options there for you to send that value to us. And I say that helps us pay our way, etc. Just to let you guys know in advance, Friedrichshafen and Datenhamvention, etc. are all coming up in the next few months, and we're trying to work out what's possible for us to go to. So again, everything that's sent our way in terms of paying for the podcast itself helps us obviously use our own money to do those trips and travel. So again, guys, I really hope you take that opportunity to support us, and as I say, we'll continue to do the work for you and work on our hobby for you. Right, well, now we're going to head off and join our news roundtable team this week, which is the two Martins, Chris, Frank and Leslie, as they discuss and generate thoughts about the latest amateur radio news, including mysterious antennas in Utah and a goodbye to Bluetooth. As always, hope you enjoy.
Well, hi guys, welcome to the ICQ podcast. This episode 394, and tonight's roundtable for that episode. Tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Chris Howard, M0TCH. Hi, Chris.
Good evening, Martin. Good evening, guys.
Yeah, good evening, Chris. I'm also joined by my partner in crime, Mr. Martin Rothwell, M0SGL. Going to get me in trouble again?
You don't need me to help you get in trouble, mate. You know that. Just give your friend Mr. Caffeine or some coffee, and then a couple of cups later and you go off looking for trouble. But anyway, good evening.
Good evening. Good evening. You ain't far wrong there either. Moving to the other side of the pond, we have Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH. Hi, Frank.
Playing the part of Mr. Bill Barnes, who will not be with us tonight. Good evening, Mark.
Yeah, good evening. Yeah, unfortunately, Bill, as he's not very well today. Hopefully he'll be back for the next episode, but he's not very well today. So get well soon, Bill. And last but not least, Mr. Good Evening himself, Mr. Leslie Butterfields, G0CIB.
Good evening, Martin. Good evening, everyone. And Bill, I hope you get well soon.
Yeah, we certainly do, Bill. Look after yourself. And we'll wait for you for the next one. Right, starting our first news story. There wasn't a lot happened over Christmas that you could discuss, really, but our first one, Martin found this. There was some mysterious antennas arriving in the Utah hills. Martin, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, it seems to be doing the rounds on social media and even on our work amateur radio group. The opening comments was, which one of you has been putting up repeaters again? And it's in the Utah hills. They've been finding some rather well-made white stick antennas accompanied by a solar panel and a box of tricks. And the authorities don't know anything about them. They don't know why they're there. They've asked people that are putting these things up to stop doing it. They've also put out a thing like, if you own this kit and you want it back, please give us a call. which in itself made me laugh. But then there's a lot of theories about this. The thing that first got me is like the one, they were just ripping it down, they were pulling it down. They said, we don't know what it is, we're just taking it down. Like, well, for starters, if it's got an antenna, it's probably there for a reason. Maybe reach out to, where is this, Utah, the FCC. Maybe they can help you. Maybe they can help you take it down safely before you get yourself a nice RF burn off that antenna. There's theories about it being helium mining for like some kind of cryptocurrency, the LoRa networks. There's lots of theories about helium currency or cryptocurrency in itself. I won't go into that, but if you Google it, you can find these. In fact, there's a number of apparent helium stations near me. I always wondered what they were, but now I know. I wondered initially, were they to do with smart meters and things like that? But I don't know. But the thing that most struck to my mind looking at these devices, they're sort of the antennas are sort of the right length for UHF, and being that a lot of government departments, and I'm not saying this is particularly inherent in America or in Utah, but in lots of places in the world, departments don't talk to each other. And what's the reckoning? My theory is this could be something to do with some kind of mountain rescue repeater network. I hope for the sake of whoever removed them that they aren't. So, yeah, interesting stuff. But I'd be very interested to see where it goes. It even made some of the local news channels. So, yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Well, as I say, we don't know, but we can have a good guess. Frank, you've actually been in these particular hills in Utah, obviously a long time before the antennas were put up there, but you might have an insight as well.
I cannot confirm or deny that I put them up there. I can actually deny it very clearly. I have actually been up in the hills near Provo. I was an invited speaker at Brigham Young University, 15 years ago maybe. They're beautiful. They're very different kind of mountains. You don't have the trees and things there that you might have in, say, certainly the Appalachian Trail, but even in the Rockies. So I did a little bit of looking at this, and gee, sometimes we find things over in Britain, and our Brits across the pond find things over here. So, what's news? It's where you find it. But it looks like it's a long-range box, a little fiberglass antenna. Many of them are on 900 megahertz. Sounds like it was well built. It had a locked battery pack and a solar panel. There was about a dozen of them around Salt Lake City. You get into public lands and you have rules. And so it's illegal to do this without permission. And some of the antennas are on these very steep peaks. It took about 5 people to remove one of them. As Martin said, we're guessing. The LoRa stuff can be used machine to machine, Internet of Things. Some of them were on University of Utah land. Perhaps some enterprising students came up with a use case, and rather than try to go through the bureaucratic management, we'll just go put them up there and do whatever we want to do with them. So we don't know. It will probably appear on the midnight talk shows about space aliens guiding the mothership here to Earth. Who knows what people will speculate. Now, that would truly be, Leslie, long range. LoRa would earn its chips on.
Hey, Frank, can I just clarify? I don't know the geography of America, but is Utah on a landing strip heading towards Area 51? I'm just checking.
Yes, it is, my friend.
Well,
it is in the neighborhood.
There we go.
It's Utah next to Nevada, Area 51, some other things there. But it may be a slow gossip day for some of the midnight talk radio shows, and someone will suddenly be an expert and have some theory about what they are. I certainly don't know what they are. It's probably some enterprising student who have a business plan or something that, hey, we're going to see if this works. And just like our compadres on the West Coast, particularly around San Francisco, Los Angeles, and elsewhere, they use those mountains to the east that separate them from Las Vegas, for example, as organic towers. They go put all their repeaters, as do the cell companies and others, and the backhaul for the internet. They put them up on these big mountains, and they get coverage of a repeater that, may go 100, 150 miles. So I'm guessing, but I think it's some enterprising students who had an idea.
Well, that's interesting, Frank, and it'd be interesting to see how this comes. Leslie, that quite amused you. What's your thoughts?
It did. I did have to look up these particular antennas, and they're sort of stubby UHF type, 915, 868, and 433 megahertz. apart from the conspiracy theories and all that stuff, I just think somebody's got a little project going and they haven't sold haven't sold anybody about it. Let's just put it up and worry about it later. But yeah, I know dealing with management and officials is a bit of a pain, but sometimes you got to do it. So what can I say? It gave me a chuckle.
Yeah. Well, it may best be that a group of people have decided that they want to have their own channel and have a chat on it without a license even. It happens. So we don't know. Chris, have we left you anything to say on this one?
Well, not really. I mean, almost it's a mystery, isn't it? There'll be lots of conspiracy theories as to what on earth it might be. I think there's some. I think the cryptocurrency thing is probably quite a likely contender, but who knows? I mean, I don't know whether they can actually start to do a bit of examination on these, perhaps do some sniffing of the frequencies, see what if they're transmitting or not, see what frequency they're on, or maybe what mode's being used, etc. I'm sure someone could actually do some analysis and figure out what these actually are, rather than just not know. But I don't know. If they keep taking them down, someone one day might say, "Oi, where's my radio gig on?" sort of thing. So who knows? But yeah, interesting story. We'll see. We shall listen with interest in the future and see if that's one. If they get an answer in the end.
I will add a brief postscript. In 1987, in Starkville, Mississippi, I was in a research center that was separated from Mississippi State University's main campus in a research park, which has become all the rage these days. And there's a U.S. Highway 82 that traverses that path. Well, we weren't connected by fast internet at the time. So I had a student who had spent 2 years riding around in an Army truck doing data processing. And he and I sent him down, he rented a trencher, and we simply ran fiber optic cable underneath a U.S. highway rather than try to get 3 government entities to tell us how to do it in terms of their approvals and all this. And when we were asked about it, with a straight face, John and I said, vandals dug a hole underneath the highway and ran fiber for us. Now, do we take it out or do we use it? And it saved them thousands of dollars from running internet over to the research park. So these things happen.
Yeah, but did you get it's more than my job's worth, mate, for allowing you to do that?
Well, I think they were happy because the bureaucrats were getting pressure to do it, and then they hadn't figured out how you get a county and a city and a university to ask the federal Department of Transportation, can we dig under your highway? And there was a culvert there, so we simply ran a conduit beside the culvert where it had eroded, so there was a clear line of sight. So we just shoved a pipe there. We didn't really damage the road. So, yeah, they were kind of happy at our mischief, so it solved the problem for them.
Yeah, well, sometimes these things have to be done, Frank. I've had some funny experiences when working in the computer industry of things that get done, and then people ask where and who did it years later because it's so useful, but then they find it so useful they never take it out.
I had an agreement with my bosses, like, if you don't ask me any questions, I won't be forced to lie to you about it. And he just said, righto, Martin.
Yeah, something like that. I remember very quickly, this is off on a tangent, but back in the 80s, I was looking after a company and they had Novell servers and they had 4 of them in this massive tower block. And I walked in one day because I worked for the computer company, and I walked in one day and the IT manager there took me aside and said, Martin, okay, I give up. Where's the 5th server you've put in? He said, we've been all over this building, we can't find it. I said, there is only 4. He said, no, there's 5, Martin. If you do a list of all the servers, you'll find there's 5. Sure enough, there was. And then we tried tracking where this 5th one was, and whoever had installed it had installed it with no password on the administrator account. This was Novell. So to find out where it was, I put a password on it. And 3 days later, there was a call from a data center in Dallas, Texas. They'd actually got, back in the 80s, a satellite link into South London, this company, between the two. And the data was going over that. So, yeah, you get into all sorts of trouble if you don't know what you're doing. Anyway, let's move to our next one.
All fun and games, Martin.
Yeah, all fun and games, mate. Okay, let's move to our next one. I didn't know about this fun, but then it's a bit of fun. India joins beaches on the air. Now I'm thinking, this is another excuse for me to take my radio with me when the family will go to the beach. You know, if we do beaches on the air, why not? So, Leslie, do you want to go first on this one?
I didn't know there was such a thing, to be honest, Martin. I mean, I knew there was lighthouses on the air and there's all sorts of SOTA on the air and all that type of thing, but I had no idea there was beaches on the air. So it's another thing to get a bit of activity in the hobby. You know, why not? Why not?
Yeah, well, there's all sorts of things like railways on the air. And
Indeed there is, yes.
Yeah, you name it. I think it might have been Martin, but somebody was suggesting maybe we ought to have Colin on the air days. What do you think, Martin?
No, I'm all for that, and I know we joke and say this about Colin. You know, worked Colin. It's, you know, we should do that as an award in itself. But you know, we could do that. But overall, you know, you can put anything you like on the air. Your back garden on the air, the potting shed on the air, the greenhouse on the air, your church is on the air. Whatever you like, you can put it on the air. Just go there, get the permission, and do it. In the case of this, you know, there's, you know, it's a great thing because it's going to, you know, prompt some questions probably from passers-by. I mean, obviously think about if someone's going to do this, don't sit next to a load of people trying to enjoy the peace and quiet of the beach and shout CQ at a blasting out SSB. But if you are on the beach, I tell you what, you got one hell of a good earth there, nice saltwater earth. That should hopefully help you get out on the air.
Yeah, certainly will. And our Edmund often goes wandering up and down the beach where he lives. So
I think he just earths himself. Does he just take his shoes and socks off and stand in the water?
Well, you do that if you like.
He's often talking about he's got some good troppo or something off over to France on like 446 on half a watt. And it's like he's got to be doing something there.
Yeah. He probably has, but we'll find out one day. So, Chris, what's your thoughts on this one? Beaches on the air, another one?
Why not? Sounds a good place to, it sounds like a nice place to activate. So why not? Why not put a beach on the air? I mean, talking about, generally there's the Walmart parking lots on the air in the States where people operate satellites from Walmart parking lots. I mean, you know, why not? If you're promoting the hobby, if it's fun, that's what it's all about, isn't it? So yeah, I encourage this. And I think this is I think they were saying this is the first time they've done this in India. So good on them, and let's hope they do it again.
Yeah, I think so. And I was trying to think of the gentleman's name in Australia, the QRP operator. He's always out on the beach.
Peter?
Peter Parker.
Peter Parker?
Yeah, Peter Parker. Maybe Peter Parker was the inspiration for this. What do you think, Frank?
He very well could be. And I will say this, we often forget this is a social hobby because of the technology. Oh, it's new technology and it takes care of itself. But these kind of on-the-air venues, to me, illustrate the need for organization. And when people organize activities, whatever it is, this happens to be beaches on the air, you know, that's where we kind of coalesce around and get engaged. And there's just a whole lot of collective human behavior as opposed to just individual behavior that goes into these. I want to ask Mr. Rothwell to cue his little sound effect machine because my penetrating question is, are these sunny beaches?
Sorry, Frank, I didn't know which sound effect you wanted.
That's the one.
There we go.
Oh, dear. We don't take all these seriously, guys, as you well know. But
our beaches are guaranteed with rain.
Not necessarily, Leslie. You get one day a year.
I said that in tongue in cheek.
Well, hang on, one day a year. Where are you thinking of, Martin?
Well, I'm thinking of the day when I'm out the country.
Let us know when that is, and I'll pop down to the coast.
No, in fairness, in fairness, and being really honest about this, we don't get that many wet days. We have over the last month. I know had extremely wet weather in the UK, but many moons ago, when I was flying gliders for a hobby, before I took up amateur radio. I think in a whole year, every weekend, there was only 2 weekends out of 52 weeks that I didn't fly due to bad weather. You know, it might have been raining in the morning, dry in the afternoon, that sort of thing. But we don't have it too bad. And we had a hot summer last year, let's be honest, guys. So,
were you flying in a simulator inside the building?
No, on a real glider.
Not in a wind tunnel, okay.
Not a wind tunnel, no. You guys tried to get me to go in the vertical wind tunnel once before, and it ain't happening.
Just a big fan.
Yeah, it is. Anyway, we've digressed terribly. Move to our next news story. Amateur radio operations at the US military academies. Frank, you probably know more about this because it's a US story, but what do you think?
This is an interesting story. There's an effort to re-engage, for lack of a better term, several of the military academies. U.S. Military Academy, Naval Academy, Air Force Academy, Coast Guard, and Marine Academy have been off for some time. Now, what I find very ironic, now, West Point at Army, which is in New York, they still have an operating club station. At one time, every one of them did. I find it very ironic. We've recently discussed the passing of one of the really major amateur radio operators of the modern era, Bob Berninga, who developed APRS. And Bob was at the Naval Academy, and he was a staff member, perhaps a faculty member. I know he did a lot of technological work there. But the reason that the APRS system was kind of got its real start was his first use case was during the Army, Navy, and apologies for our European brothers, what we call football here in the States, the college football game between Army, Navy. They take a football and they run it with a group of soldiers there to the other, wherever the game is going to be played. And so APRS was used to track the movement of the football from the Naval Academy up to West Point. So it's just very ironic that it was kind of faded out at many of the military academies there. West Point not being where Bob Berninga was. He was at the Naval Academy in Annapolis. They're the only ones with a station. So it's good to for this to happen, and I'm glad they've kind of recognized it. So I think it's a very good feel-good type of thing.
Yeah, I think you're right, because when we look at all these things, however we get amateur radio out to people, it's got to be a good thing. Chris, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's good that they've rebooted, if that's the right phrase, reinvigorated this club. It sounds like it was in the doldrums a bit, and they've now managed to get some folks that are interested and are getting back together again. So it's whether it's people that are retired or whatever, or that are there now, it's great that they're actually getting on the air. They're running nets and things, and it's good that things moving forward, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose the other thing is if the military have got an amateur radio club, if they need to call for the assistance from radio into the amateur fraternity, then at least they'd be operating a similar way. They'd kind of understand how to operate, or that would make it more far easier for them to work. That would be my thought. What do you think, Martin?
Well, I look at this, it's like it's another club station getting back on the air. Great. My mind, whatever promotes the hobby, whatever helps keep people interested, gets people on the air, it's got to be a good thing. Maybe some new call signs coming in, maybe occasional special event stations to work, but it's a military, I can't even say it, military academy. Will they be using military kit? That's what I want to know.
I don't know, mate. I don't know is the truthful answer, but it'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Now, somebody who might know a bit more about this than the rest of us is our Leslie.
Martin?
You spent some time in the military, didn't you?
I few years, but that was many years ago, many years ago. Yes, you can use military kit on amateur radio frequencies. It does work because I've done it. The old PRC 320 and PRC 321 Klansman kit, if anybody remembers them out there. I love those two particular radios. They were my bread and butter. But there we go. Bit of story. Yeah, they've got the club that was in the doldrums, and that's very obvious. But they've now reinvigorated, and they've got 50 members. The thing that, yes, reinvigorates the word, and that's a good thing. The other thing is I'm picking up on is that when you're in the military, it's all about passing your trade boards. And some people find that difficult. Some people find it easy, as in any sort of study. But if you've got an interest in what you're studying, it becomes a lot easier, and you pick it up easier because the interest is there. That's what I personally found, and that's why I sort of picked things up a lot bit quicker on that side of things. So that's my thoughts, Martin. But yeah, get the hobby out there and working again. Good show.
Yeah. Well, I think it's good. And those Klansman receivers, they're pretty much all 24 volt, aren't they? So
yes, I know. Yes.
Yeah. So if you are playing with surplus military equipment, certainly in the UK, you've got to have a slightly different shack setup because they're 24 volts, and sometimes
what you do, Martin, is you have 4 batteries in, I believe it's off the top of my head, series parallel, and then you have to put it into a DC. If I'm doing this off the top of my head, it's a DCC unit, and then that is then connected to the radio. Gosh, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, so there are some little things, and I know some of the rigs only do one sideband because that's all the military
that's right,
want, and those sort of things. But
yeah,
all in all, I think it's there's people that are interested in military communications and using military equipment or surplus military equipment as well. So it's another part of our hobby.
And there is a guy on YouTube that's got fantastic results using the old PRC 320 with just a dipole up, sloping wire up a tree, 30 watts, great, absolutely great.
Yeah. Well, I know a couple of people at Sutton and Cheam that are big into military, ex-military radio, and that's quite interesting. Right, moving on. This one kind of just caught my eye. In Malaysia, the Communications and Media Commission are making changes to amateur radio, and it looks like there's a new Class C license and other bits and pieces. They're kind of going to bring them into step, I suppose, for the rest of the world. Sorry, Leslie, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, it's. I read through the article, and it can be interpreted several ways, and it's not quite clear. But my interpretation is of what they're doing is they're trying to do it similar to other countries where you have like a novice, an intermediate, and advanced, similar type thing. And this has been the model around the world. Now, I know some people complain about it, and I get that. Can our system be improved? Yep. Absolutely. But I think this is the way things are going. What it does is encourages new people into the hobby. They can get a nice little cheap handheld. If they like it, they can progress. If they don't like it, there's nothing lost. And you consider that like in the 80s where a handheld was like £250 and it was a lot of money then. I think it's a good thing to get people into the hobby. And this is one of the ways to do it.
Yeah, and I think they're probably bringing themselves into alignment with the rest of the world there.
Yes, yeah, that's my reading of it.
Yeah. Chris, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, kind of similar to what you said there, really. I mean, I think it's a good idea. Certainly here in the UK, we've got a 3-tier system, and similar in the States. I'm not sure how many classes. It talks about Class A and Class C in this article, so I don't know if there's a Class B as well. But if it's a way of getting someone gradually introduced to the hobby and then they can progress later on to a higher class of license and perhaps they've got less privileges as they, start off, I think it's a great idea. And certainly, that's how a lot of people, including myself, got into the hobby and, not the big jump into the full license, but actually just a toe in the water with the lower levels and then moving up to the to the more difficult but the more privileged classes later on.
Yeah, I remember you actually turning up for your course, and you turned up with a couple of your friends, and I think it was just a bit of fun I got the impression that your friend Mike was big into it, and his brother Mark and you came along just for a bit of fun. And I think you bit the bullet,
and now I'm the club secretary. But there you go. That's another story.
You really embraced it. So yeah, it's great. We need to be inclusive, not exclusive, I think, with the hobby, which is the important thing.
Martin, when I took my test many years ago, and I've got to admit some of it is out of date now, I said to the centre, can I take the exam? And it was, no, you must take the course. No, you must take the course. And actually, that wasn't true. If you just paid the fee, you could take it, which is exactly what I did. And then when I got the pass slip through, and I looked at it, I took one look, and it was credit and a pass, I think, something like that. And I thought, quick, run away before they change their minds. They can't do nothing when you've got that pass slip in your head.
Yeah, that's true. And I know in the UK, we now can go straight to full license again.
Yes, you can, yes.
And I can't knock it because you and I went straight to full license, Leslie, in the UK. So let's be fair about it. But
it was a different way of doing things. Things change.
It's a different world. And the other thing is both you and I had a radio background anyway, which would have helped us immensely. But by doing the 3-tier system, it means that people that have no radio background can actually come into our hobby and see if they like it. And often, when they like it, they move forward, which is good. So, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mine, thoughts on this one?
Not much that hasn't already been said. I mean, they reference, I think, Colin mentioned about the potential of removal of Morse code and things like that as being a requirement. But anything that if they're talking about overall bringing licenses into line with models and things from around the world, whatever helps get people licensed is a good thing. I always wanted to do what was at the time known as the RAE. I wanted to get into amateur radio from a high school age. One of my friends had his dad was an amateur radio operator. He, through that I got into CB, but there was nowhere doing the courses, and then the courses were running. They were expensive. They weren't easily accessible for someone that was my age, and then, I sort of just lost hope of ever being able to get it. And then suddenly the 3-tier system came into the UK and I got my foundation. I was over the moon. I was on the air, and they weren't, we weren't quite at the cheap Chinese handhelds available, but they were affordable handhelds, and that was all good. And then obviously we go into intermediate and advanced. The fact that is potentially coming in Malaysia, great. Anything that helps people get on the air, I think, is a good thing. It will bring more people into the hobby. It will promote more, ultimately, sales of radios. It will encourage the radio manufacturers to think, we've got more business, we've got more stuff, potentially invest in newer technology. So it's got to be a win-win everywhere.
Certainly has. And yeah, I agree with what you said. Frank, have we left you anything to say on this one?
Oh, yes, you have. I look at it a bit from my own professional experience in the following way. If, an anthropologist were out studying something called amateur radio operators, they would tend to see things that perhaps us rank and file operators wouldn't see. And I think there's a couple of things that are worth noting. We are not independent little polygons here in these different countries. We have political standing, and there's a regulator for Britain, the U.S., Mexico, Canada, and so on, Malaysia as well. And they determine the rules. And so we have a new frequency band in one country. Well, you can't work it in another country because they don't have access to that, and so on. So these kind of standard settings, in this case in Malaysia, and their regulator MC, which I just absolutely love. I mean, that's MC squared, right? And I just think it's great that they're doing that and getting their people kind of into alignment with other countries. We tend to, second point I want to make, we tend to have all these beliefs about how things should be. It's commonly called an ideology, the way things should be as opposed to the way things are. No, you can't. No, Leslie, you can't go all the way to the head of the class because you already know the stuff and take the exam. You must sit here and listen. Geez, you were ready to do it and you did. So a lot of these beliefs, I think, on the one hand, may seem good. On the other hand, they probably do more destruction, if you will, keep people out, blocking people. So I agree with what's been said, and I think sort of modernizing, without anything derogatory meant by that, but modernizing these and really aligning them with some other countries just facilitates us talking to people in other countries and getting to know one another.
You're dead right. And our hobby is a very sociable hobby. They will learn a hell of a lot from talking to other amateurs around the world and in their own country. And invariably, as I've said to a lot of people, with amateur radio, you're never going to be lonely. It's a great hobby. But there we go. So it's nice to see Malaysia is now coming into line, let's put it that way, with their new licensing system. Okay, moving to our last news story, and this is a kind of throw the hand grenade in the room type story, and it said, goodbye to Bluetooth. Well, we're not really sure, but Chris, you haven't gone first, so do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, so this is talking about it says new technology. So there's a new technology that apparently is 100 times faster than Bluetooth, developed by a scientist from Bankura. I'm not sure what Bankura is, whether that's a place or an institution. But essentially, basically been awarded a patent for this, and apparently it reckons to have the world's smallest antenna at 14 by 11 millimeters. It reckons to be 100 times faster than Bluetooth. So whether this will, Bluetooth is pretty ubiquitous now. I mean, lots and lots of devices have Bluetooth. You can know an awful lot with Bluetooth, and to displace that will be quite a job. But this potentially might have that potential. But it's this could be the absolute best technology in the world. Doesn't necessarily mean to say it's going to be adopted. There's lots of other factors that contribute to the success of technology, as we know from the past.
We certainly do, and this is a gentleman in India. And India's done very, very well for amateur radio. We've been pretty much every round table is something coming out of India because there's a lot of technology going on there. So it's an Indian gentleman that's a professor that's come up with this. Leslie, what's your thoughts?
Well, you're certainly right about technology coming out of India, Martin. That's very much so. Just looking at the story, the origins of Bluetooth, I think we've got a King Harold Gormson who we got to playing for Bluetooth, but never mind. That's just a bit of history thrown in. Yeah, I think you're right. There's a huge difference between an idea being patented and the idea actually going on the market, and the latter is a lot harder. So will it change Bluetooth overnight? I don't think so. Will it probably change it or be an addition? Yeah, eventually. Like most things improve and things change. So that's where I am on this, Martin.
Yeah. I would say it's a good thing, and we've got to keep moving forward, and people come up with new ideas. Great. I'm all for that. So there you go. Frank, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, we talked in our preview before we began to record, about this story. And I've been a news reporter, was a news director in the radio market, and still have my hand in with some of the news organizations that call on me from time to time. And often the frame that the editor is usually one who puts on a story. Okay, something happens. All right, how do we pitch this? How do we tell the story? And for, at least 10, 15 years, there's been, this is going to replace Bluetooth. Oh, that's going to replace Bluetooth. And I remember all the excitement back when Microsoft was beginning to announce they would incorporate Bluetooth into the operating system. And I don't remember what version of Windows, it was. Well, there's always been a Bluetooth killer. And I could be wrong about what I'm going to say. I don't see this as the Bluetooth killer. in the same sense that we still have serial ports around, even in the presence of USB. We had something with FireWire for a while. It was going to kill the USB. Well, who now uses FireWire unless you have to? So I look at this way. I think it's a complementary approach that will perhaps be in, some other hardware package that gets blended in to different devices that can use connectivity. What's the thing that hams talk about both in online forums, on the air, at HamFest to some degree, and on Zoom talks when there's a new radio announced? Does it have Bluetooth? Can I do FT8 with it without all the wires? Yeah. Does it do Bluetooth audio only, or will it do Bluetooth data? So I think when you look at amateur radio as a sociologist, we are really engaged and invested in Bluetooth. So if this came out tomorrow, we wouldn't change our hardware. We couldn't change some hardware. So I look at it as a great thing. It's a terrific thing. Just look at Asher Farhan, just in amateur radio, and what he's done with the BitX line of radios. Several of us on the podcast, Chris and Martin and Martin Butler, you have worked in IT. I've done a lot of IT projects. Leslie, I'm not sure about your background with IT, but perhaps you too. And so we know that India has a very robust IT computer hardware sector. It tends to be located in certain areas. So I think this is wonderful. I think this is what universities are about, doing innovation and developing things. Universities like to get the patents for things because they make a buck off of it. Hopefully the professor does too. I've sat on the patent copyright committee and heard cases of where a university took it all or wanted to, and that kind of thing. So I'm just delighted by this. Wouldn't we all want faster speeds, 100 times faster? You bet we would.
Yeah, you're dead right, Frank. But it's interesting, I think. Martin, what's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah. Goodbye Bluetooth is the title. Well, my first thoughts on this were like, everybody uses Bluetooth. Everybody has something with Bluetooth in. Your car has it built in. Your headphones, my Anytone 878 radio, even the mixing desk that I'm using in the studio I'm in right now has Bluetooth in. It ain't going anywhere fast. I'm not belittling what this guy has done, but I have to wonder why. Do we need something faster? I use Bluetooth exclusively for audio. I don't need to send anything faster. We know that anything that goes over Bluetooth is compressed anyway. Typically, we're listening to a compressed MP3 stream, either from an MP3 on your phone or from digital radio, which is heavily compressed anyway. Do we need anything faster? Not at that range. If I wanted to send high-speed data at like 10 meters range, I'd use Wi-Fi or Ethernet or a wired cable. I can't really see the use for it, at least not at the moment. I'm interested when they say he's developed the world's smallest antenna. Well, it's debatable. It's sized 14 millimeters by 11 millimeters, so 1.4 centimeters. Is that right? Yeah, 1.4 centimeters by 1.1 centimeters. So, yeah, that's small, but, antennas are relative to the size of the band they're operating on. Bluetooth is 2.4 gigahertz? So what's that, 13 centimeters, something like that? How is it going to be a fast, how is, an ultra wideband antenna, how is it making any difference? I suppose you can get more, get a wider bandwidth on it, but then are there going to be frequencies available? Because again, that's the other problem that you have is, it's hard enough to get frequencies, especially in gigahertz, in one part of the world, let alone a worldwide patent where everybody is going to put it in their phones. Like, yeah, good luck with that. But, I'd be interested to see where it goes. Am I excited about it? No, not really, because I really don't think Bluetooth is going anywhere for a very, very long time. We've had Bluetooth version 1, Bluetooth version 2, etc. They've upgraded it. They've always been backwardly compatible. I'll be interested to see where this goes. Watch this space, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think we do Bluetooth has a market, but equally we can't not look at progressing forward. I mean, so much these days, even in our hobby, I think in 10 years' time, predominantly, unless you're building a kit radio, and even then you probably won't be doing that, we've gone over to software-defined radios. And yet, 20 years ago, it was your standard superhet type design. So, yeah, I think we've got to keep an eye on it. I don't think Bluetooth's going away. It was a bit of a clickbait title, but at least it was worth knowing that something else may be coming along fairly soon. That's where I go on that one. Okay, well, that completes our news stories. Let's see what the guys have been up to since the last time we had a chat with them. I'm going to go with Leslie first. Leslie, what have you been up to?
Oh, thank you, Martin. I just landed on my lap. Well, apart from the New Year, for the Christmas and the New Year festivities, which are now out of the way. So one of the things I've been working on is the Anytone. Radio came into the Anytone 8778 UV, and it came into our club possession. And guess who got to program it? And now I couldn't connect up properly and all sorts of things. And so somebody suggested programming it manually. Now, to say I dislike programming those radios manually is a slight understatement. I sort of go into meltdown when that happens. But anyway, we messed about and was at the club, and somebody says, "Oh yeah, I've got a spare lead." So we swapped leads. And thankfully, the whole thing burst into life. It sort of connected to the radio. So I thank you for that one. So we're now on UHF, VHF at the local club, and we've managed to get the radio programmed properly. And I don't have any headaches about programming it manually because I don't have to do it. But that's all I've been up to, Martin.
Yeah, well, programming DMR radios, I assume you programmed it in DMR as well as...
No, it's not DMR at all, no.
You haven't programmed it. It's 878 is DMR.
No, the 778.
778. All right.
It's not
okay.
a DMR set.
All right, no problems then. Well, I was just also going to say, if it had been an 878, the 878 Anytone uses the same programming cable as a TYT. So if you suddenly buy a radio like I did without a programming cable, just check if other models actually do run the same programming cable. So there you go, just a bit of info. Chris, what have you been up to?
Not a massive amount, although I've got a similar story around Anytone radios, or not particularly radios, Anytone particularly, but I have an OpenSpot 3 hotspot, and that works on DMR, D-Star, in fact, various modes, Fusion, etc. And mine's configured to use for DMR. So over Christmas, I had it in the car while I was driving up north, a bit of driving, so I thought I'd bring it in the car with my Anytone 878 DMR handheld. And I just couldn't get it to work, and it wasn't powering on, it wasn't right, basically, and then the battery was flat or something. But anyway, basically, I ended up doing a full reset, which eventually worked. But doing a full reset meant all my configuration was lost and I had to start again. And then I was after that, I was struggling to make it work, and I kind of left it for a while, and then the other day I sort of picked it up again and thought, I've got to try and get this sorted. It's obviously not a fault, it's just a configuration I've got wrong somewhere. So I was watching the logs, because you can see the logs of what's going on when you transmit from your radio, and it shows you on the screen, what's going on. You kept coming up saying color code mismatch. So DMR, you got this idea of a color code that you got to set on the radio and on the hotspot. So I'm double and triple checking, and yeah, no, they're definitely both on the same color code. And I was keying up, and then I could looking in the logs, I could see it was saying, "Oh, you're on color code 2, color code 6, color code 4." It was just randomly picking up the wrong color code. So I thought, something's definitely right here. There's obviously some sort of fault. So I did a bit of Googling and found someone who advised that there's actually a calibration tool built into the OpenSpot that you can run. So you basically you type in a frequency that you want to set your radio to. So you set your radio to a frequency, then you tell the hotspot what that frequency is, you key up, and then you sort of hit this calibrate option, and then it goes away and it figures out how far off the frequency is. It's actually about 300 hertz off the frequency. So basically, once you've done that, it sets that as an offset. And then that was it, fixed. So that was that. Apart from that, I've not really done an awful lot of radio at all for the last few weeks. I've been pretty busy elsewhere.
Yeah, I think it's all that way. Frank, what have you been up to over the Christmas period, radio-wise?
Well, we had, some, for us, very cold weather. Some of the hams that follow the podcast who are north of us would kind of laugh at the cold we had. It was around zero and just slightly below zero. So for us, that's pretty tough. So we had a lot of cold weather there, i.e. could not get outside. So I did a bit of writing and some things like that working here in the house. I finished the paper on horizontal loop antennas that I've mentioned. It was scheduled for the February issue of Practical Wireless, but Don sent me a note and said he really needed to bump it to March. So it'll be in the March issue of Practical Wireless. It's called Avoid Getting Loopy Over HF Loop. And what that's about briefly is I created a novel method for measuring the feed point impedance directly at the bare wire ends of a loop. As our listeners know, it comes back together, which hence it's called a loop. But you can do this with keeping your feet on the ground, and you don't have to use a VNA to attempt to cancel out by calibration coax. It really only requires raising the loop wire twice. Now remember, thinking about a loop, you've got multiple feed point or multiple attachments to the wire, which makes it kind of complicated in some cases. You just have to raise it twice, once with an antenna analyzer that uses Bluetooth connectivity, hence our Bluetooth story, measure the impedance at the bare wire, analyze the data, and deal with what's the optimal transmission line system. So many people believe that 450 ohm ladder line, that's the way to go. It might be, but until you measure, you really don't know what that mismatch might be. Most of the models, say it's 200 to 400 ohms, but until you measure in your particular case, you won't know. So if that's not appropriate, what wind of a balun, what ratio is optimal for the fundamental design frequency? Mine was for 80 meters. What Larry Seebeck, who's been Silent Key for a good while, but who was kind of a guru in antenna modeling some years ago, his modeling of the horizontal loop has become what is the de facto standard, in that it's in the ARL handbook, it's almost everywhere, as here's the gospel, here's the measurements, and I take no umbrage with what he did at all. But we really need to know what it's like in our environment, where you've got perhaps other things that may couple with it and change things. So what wind would you use? I wound up using a 6-to-1 ratio, and anyone can put my call sign in on whisper.rocks, at least for the time being, and see where that little loop antenna that's run around the shingles of my house, where it's getting. It jumped across the pond, Martin, this morning by 8 in the morning on some of the higher bands. And you get a gain over the fundamental frequency on a horizontal loop in most cases. So that'll be in Practical Wireless in March. I've also, during that time, completed the manuscript on transmit composite noise in modern HF transceivers. We've been listening to Rob Sherwood on how well does a radio receive, and I've certainly done some work and involved his 9-bench test into a composite index I call the Sherwood Performance Index. And so I finished that, and I compare about 20 modern radios, including the new Elecraft K4D and the Yaesu FTDX10 and FT10. And these are on bench-tested transmit composite noise. Our listeners might remember Rob Sherwood publishing an article in QST in 2019 outlining the problem that manufacturers had kind of focused on receive capability, oddly thanks to Rob's measurement, and left transmission quality behind. He said his Collins radio, I forget which model, was the cleanest transmitter that he'd ever tested. So he used data from both Rob and a group of hams that convened on Corsica for a measurement festival for noise data. And so I link at the rig level, transmit composite noise, the Sherwood receive test, year of entry into the market, and as well as price, and the EHAM consumer satisfaction ratings. Is there a radio that gets it good on all of those metrics? No, there isn't. So there's some real surprises in the performance of some very well-known and well-thought-of transceivers. That paper is now under review at a well-known ham radio magazine, and I hope to hear within the next few days if they're interested. If not, I'll see if someone else is. Perhaps I'm already scheduled to talk to the Long Island CW Club in March. This will be part of it. And once I hear back from the magazine where the editor's reviewing it, I'll be ready to schedule other talks. I'm good on the ICQ podcast website as well as on QRZ. If you're just desperate and can't get a good speaker, I might be available. Martin, I'm continuing to work on building and cleaning the 5 billion plus, that is 5 Bravo spots in the Whisper database. Yeah, it's a big one. It goes from April 2008 to the present time. But there's some glitches in the data. Some operators, for example, put their beacons right in the middle of the aeronautical band of 110 megahertz in the U.S. There are some others. This generally isn't talked about a whole lot, even on the forum, the Whisper forum. Now, Ono, VK6FLAB, who has the Foundations of Amateur Radio podcast, he and I are comparing notes because he is also building out this database. Some others have done this. Phil, VK7JJ, that runs Whisper.rock, he just flags it and puts it out as an odd band and puts it in red. But I'm headed toward some statistical analysis using GIS to look at propagation. So it's a problem I've got to clear up because we don't want to use inappropriate data for that. So I'm doing that as part of my affiliation with Hamzilla. So I'll report on this progress as I get there. And I'll end with this, Martin. I've got another crazy idea. I'm thinking about putting a 2-element HF beam in my attic. Now, I've already published some work that shows that the Cushcraft D4 dipole on 40 through 10 meters, it seems to work okay, particularly for an attic antenna. Now, this beam will be pointed directly at you folks over there in the London area. I've looked at it on an azimuthal map, and it's directly toward London, given the way my attic sits. So will a 2-element beam outperform my dipoles on 20, 15, and 10? Give me a few months to figure out which one I'm going to buy, put it up, and research the results. So with the sunspot cycle, Martin, hey, we may be able to work one another on HF. So I know that I'm not getting in trouble, Martin, because I just bought my wife a new car. So I've got probably a month before I can't get into much trouble, okay?
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, I Mrs. B had her car, and then we went down to one car, but so I do use it more than I used to her car these days. But and all what you've done, Frank, sounds like you've been very, very busy. So very, very interesting there. And we have worked each other on the digital talk group. So we can do it via radio, well, internet and radio, but it'd be nice to have a go on HF. So hopefully try that when you're ready. And I'll have to sort my antenna out for HF as well at home. Must do that again soon. And good one. Mine, what have you been up to?
Bits this and that. I've been sorting out some radio-wise. I've been sorting out some new PMSE licenses for work. There are program making special events licenses, basically radio mic frequencies. For we pay an absolute fortune for private frequencies. It is incredible. Private frequencies that run like 10 or 50 milliwatts. I forget what now. I've had a new fibre put into my house for a mega fast internet line, and the installers very helpfully left me with a fairly big roll of cable that they didn't need anymore. So we're just going to get rid of this. Can you throw it away for us? Yeah, sure. Great, but it's fibre. Although it does appear to be wrapped in what I believe is like Kevlar strands, so might be useful to support an antenna. It certainly won't be useful for making an antenna because there's no metal connectivity with it. I did think I was going to have to reprogram like my computer and my hotspot and things like that. But fortunately, I am able to use my own high-end router rather than the one that the ISP provide me with. So I'm able to keep all the same IP ranges and all the ports and everything that I've got open, and directing places still work. Programming up new repeater hardware, again, that's been paused for reasons I won't mention on the air, as well as the fact I had to move all the furniture in my garage where my workbench is to let them run the aforementioned fibre in. So that hopefully will be going back this weekend. And a couple of other things. I have now cancelled my RSGB subscription. I didn't get an apology for them not replying to my calls, just an email that said, we didn't get your message. I've cancelled it. So thanks for that. Well, answer your phones during working hours and check your voicemails working. So thinking about putting that money probably towards Practical Wireless, because I quite like the magazine from there. And, of course, playing with the talk group, which I tend to listen to most of the time when I'm at home. The radio is on. In fact, it's on now. Just got the volume turned down on it. But, yeah, usually listening. So if people pop up during the day, if I'm able to reply, I do. Other than that, and I did leave Whisper running. I'm not a massive fan of the low power stuff, but I did leave Whisper running on various bands throughout the Christmas period before my electric tripled in price. Because of the price hike, and we fixed our electric for a while just to see what was going on with that, and it was interesting watching how the propagation on the different bands worked overnight. And 5 watts. I think, as Frank mentioned, it's amazing. 5 watts on various modes, right the way through to Australia, New Zealand, an Antarctic research station. It's incredible what can hear you.
That's actually a lot on Whisper.
Yeah. Or 5 watts.
Now, 5 watts is a lot on Whisper.
Well, I can't go any lower than 5 watts because my radio doesn't do less than that. I say 5 watts, it's got a fair length of coax and in between that and the antenna, and also the antenna in particular, like 80 meters and 40 meters, is nowhere near high enough. But 5 watts, 80 meters with an antenna that's probably at its lowest point 5 meters off the ground, and at its highest point 8 or 9 meters off the ground, it was hitting a fair chunk, certainly the East Coast and towards the middle of the US. No problem.
I think if you knock it right down to, let's say, 0.1 of a watt, and you'll be staggered.
Probably, but I'd say I can't. The radio doesn't go that low. I turn it down as low as it will go.
Yeah.
That's all it will do.
Martin, let me just give a shout out. You may be using this, but Whisper.rocks that Phil, VK7JJ down in Aussieville, puts out and updates it regularly. He has a little ability for you to click on the hour button above the map, and it will go replay the previous X number of hours. So you can kind of look at that over time. Just a lot of cool features. So
I've got 3. So I've got the one I was using is whispernet.org. But they seem to have problems with the Google mapping. I mean, it does work, but you get loads of error messages saying you've not paid for the map. I've got wsprd.vk7jj.com.
Now, that's his old one. The one that he's supplanted it with is whisper.rocks.
Yeah, so if you go to that website, that's actually now disappeared since I made that, and whisper.rocks. I have got that bookmarked. I haven't played with it as much, but I have got it bookmarked. I haven't played with it as much. I did get something come up, but I sort of knew how the whispernet.org worked. And I'm like, okay, I'm going with that one just while I'm playing with it. I've looked at Whisper Rocks. It looks pretty cool, but I haven't learned how to drive it yet properly. So that's something else I would definitely be playing with.
Well, sounds like you've been busy, Martin. Which is
just a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, probably more than me. I mentioned on the last podcast I was going to play with Bluetooth on my 817. The device arrived this morning while I was at work, so I haven't actually tried it out yet. So forgive me for that. But it means that if it does what I think it is, it allows me to remote control via a tablet, have a bigger screen display on an 817. Might be useful when I'm out. Ed sent me all sorts of emails about this stuff, but hey, it was a very, very cheap device, and I just fancied having a play with it and see if it worked. So if it doesn't work, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. The other thing I did was reset a new jumper block up for my Tigertronics interface, digital interface. I've got one of the very, very early ones that doesn't have the built-in sound card. So there's no reason why I shouldn't use it. It worked perfectly well with my IC703. I don't own that radio anymore, so I've just done the jumpers for the 817. As you say, Martin, you and I have been on the talk group a fair amount. Not as much as I'd like, but we have been on. I bought myself some electronic components, some resistors, capacitors, a few transistors and bits and pieces, because I've been playing with little circuits on breadboards and just doing a little bit of silly stuff. And sometimes you look at certain little circuits in books and think, I'll give that a try. So the idea was I bought some resistors, capacitors, that sort of thing, and some PNP and NPN transistors, and thought, well, I can always knock something together fairly quickly and just try things out. So that's what I'm one of the things. Colin was over last weekend, hence no radio from me over most of last weekend. He dragged me to football, and I got wet getting there, sat in the stands and looking at the weather as it was raining with about 5 minutes to the end of the match. And then just before the match ended, it stopped raining. So at least when we had the 1.5 mile walk back to the station, yeah, it was in the dry. So that was a good one. But what he did do, he gave me a Microsoft Surface Go, the original one. And it's, I think, got 4 gig of RAM and 64 gig solid state drive in it.
They're really not bad, Martin.
Yeah, well, the thing is, Frank, most people say that ain't no use for anything.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Yeah, but the thing is, Frank, it no longer has Windows on it. So the quickest way to annoy Microsoft is my Surface Go now runs Ubuntu 22.04 long-term support. And it runs it very, very well. So a little bit of things you have to do, install it normally as you would. Getting it to boot from the USB stick is a bit of a nightmare because some of the things don't work properly. But if anybody really needs to know how to do it, I'll point you in the right direction. And then you have to patch the kernel afterwards because I got it installed, but it wouldn't shut down. It would effectively shut down and hang, and then you'd have to manually push the button. So that's done now. And last but not least, I did a couple of presentations for work last week, and they went down very well. And I also updated the digital talk group presentation I did some time ago, because I'm doing it for a group with you, Frank, aren't I?
Yeah, that's correct. I tend to meet on most Saturday mornings with a group called Cycle 25 out of Canada. And Martin, we're looking forward to having you talk to us about the ICQ Digital Talk Group. They are very excited to learn more about it.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that.
That'll be on their YouTube channel so others can watch.
Yeah. Did you tell them, Frank, I got a face for radio?
I did. I told them you were a very handsome bloke, and that Mrs. B was very fortunate to be able to make your acquaintance.
I'll send you the money, Frank.
Diplomat of the Year award.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we can have a laugh. But, yeah, so I hope they'll be doing that for them fairly soon. We just need to set the date on that. So, not a lot of radio stuff from me. But, yeah, I've been fairly busy on other things as well. Family things as well. So, that's good. Right, all that's left for me to do is thank you guys for turning up tonight. I'd like to thank Mr. Chris Howard, M0TCH.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, guys. Another good episode, I think.
Yeah, I hope so. And I'd like to thank Mr. Martin Rothwell, M0SGL.
It's been fun. See you next time.
Will do. I'd like to thank Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH.
It was my pleasure, Martin.
No problems, Frank. Good to have you. And Mr. Leslie Butterfield, G0CIB.
Thank you for having me on, Martin. It's been a pleasure.
That's great, mate. So all's left for us to do now is to say 73s and continue with the podcast. 73, guys.
Cheerio.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
And now it's time to have a look at the news in brief with me, Colin M6BLY. We start off with congratulating news to Robert Mike Zero, Romeo Whiskey X-Ray from Wiltshire in the UK, who's activated every single SOTA summit in England within the calendar year of 2022. Now, this unprecedented achievement just doesn't end there. He also extensively activated in France, Scotland and Wales, and also some of the other Benelux countries as well, recording a total of 326 activations with a mammoth 1,476 activator points in the year, which makes him almost a 1.5 mountain goat. Robert is now going to continue his achievements by targeting completing Wales in 2023, and as I say, fantastic achievement for him for now. So you can find out more about his exploits and about the SOTA activating by visiting sota.org.uk, where you can find more information about this exciting part of our hobby. Happy to announce that the Hamfest season is starting to roll around now, and we're proud to announce that we will be attending the Hamzilla Radio Festival. It's going to be taking place near the Ashford International Station, Ashford, Kent, at the Julie Rose Stadium, which is close to the M20 motorway. The event taking place on Sunday the 12th of March gives you the opportunity to meet people including SDR Play, the RSGB, ICOM, CCOM antennas, and even some of your favourite UK-based ICQ podcast presenters. If those don't whet your appetite, then you can also take part in a build-a-thon, which allows people to build their own FM radio. So lots to do there. Tickets are only £5 in advance, or £6 if you want to get in early before the crowds, and trader and exhibition tables are still available at a very reasonable price. So you can find out more about this event by going to hamzilla.uk. Now, also talking about, the Hamfest season as well, the QSOToday team are going to be doing their virtual Ham Expo again. This one, is aimed for late March, the 24th to the 26th of March. This year's theme on this edition's theme is the new ham license, and now what? As they say, there's over 800,000 licensed hams in the USA, and the majority of them are not on the air. So not only are they looking for speakers to, got great talks, etc., to get people active and using their license, but as I say, there will be the usual round of lots of interesting things, etc., and a great way of meeting up your fellow hams, are virtually on these types of shows. So you can find out more about this event by visiting the group's website, QSOTodayHamExpo.com, and if you got any interest in becoming a speaker, etc., you can submit that by going to the same website /speakercall.html. Right, now we head over to our feature in this episode, which is a feature on working with SMDSs. As always, hope you enjoy.
And now what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Hi guys, for this episode's feature I wanted to do something slightly different, because at episode 394 we've done a lot of things and some we will revisit, but I thought it'd be nice just to run something a little bit more or technical orientated. So, working with SMDs, well, I'm sure most of you know what they are. I'm talking about surface mount devices. And in fairness, being an old person, I've always used through-hole components. I grew up with through-hole components, and they've got smaller and smaller as the time's gone on. However, with the art of solid-state design now and microprocessors and low-power devices, components get smaller and smaller because we're trying to make things more portable to go in our pockets. We also don't need the big resistors that can dissipate lots of power because we're running on low voltage and low current devices. So surface mount technology is the board type that people use these days to manufacture things. Now I'm going to start off with just a few acronyms because, as I say to people at work, if you don't understand the acronyms, then when people come up to you and throw one at you, you look blank. So, SMD is surface mount device. So that could be a resistor, capacitor, transistor, whatever. SMT stands for surface mount technology. SMA, surface mount assembly. SMC, surface mount components. You know, that's a clever one. You know, you may find that in the spec. SMC. SMP stands for surface mount package. Now, it's a package of components kind of in a case form. SME is surface mount equipment. So just be aware of these sort of things. Surface mount equipment, like the assembly machines you would use. So just a few acronyms that if somebody comes up with it, you know what they're talking about. Now, these devices are often very small. Some I've seen as small as a grain of sand, others much more manageable. Now, with resistors and capacitors, if you look at them, they come with a number, not only the value, but a number, and the number dictates the size. Now, the larger the number, the bigger the size of the resistor, physical size, or physical capacitor. So, one thing Chris is, my friend Chris has probably going to laugh when he hears this, but he often rags me for using measurements by inches. But for argument's sake, a 2920 package style, for argument's sake, is 7.4 millimeters by 5.1. But what's the correlation between 2920 and that measurement? No, the 2920 refers to the package size in inches, so it is 0.29 by 0.2. So a 2920 is 0.29 of an inch by 0.20. Now, if we drop down to 1806, it's 0.18 times 0.6 of an inch. So that's how you work out the physical size of your component. And there are tables on the internet that will physically show you the millimeters if you are somebody who works in millimeters and not an older person like me. But that's how you tell the size. Now, as you can imagine, they are quite small, and it does bug me. Now, transistors, often and diodes mostly, can be three-legged devices, and their measurements is the opposite, because the smaller the number, the bigger the device. So, for argument's sake, a SOT transistor, which is SOT23, is much bigger than an SOT523, which seems a bit strange because it's the opposite way round, but just that's the way it is. And, that's the way it is. So, SOT stands for Small Outline Transistor, by the way, just to clear things up. Now, components, recognizing them on the board. Well, resistors are nearly always black with a piece of metal each end for soldering, for the solder to take. And the resistors nearly always, if not always, have numbers on them, which gives you the value of the resistor. Some inductors are black and look like resistors. So, don't just think, I've got a short circuit resistor or I've got a very low ohms resistor. It might be an inductor. This is where having the circuit diagram certainly helps. And I remember trying to repair an FT400 and knocking this device off the board and thinking it was a resistor. It was only when I got the circuit diagram out and found out that no, it was actually an inductor. Some diodes are 2 connectors, some are the 3 connector, like I told you the transistors are. They put them in the same package as a transistor. Some diodes are just 2 connectors, and these are often just these were often just black, looking very much like a resistor in all honesty. So you've got to be a little bit careful. And I say, circuit diagram certainly helps. Capacitors are often buff in colour with no number on. And you can spot them fairly quickly on the board, but they're the different capacitors. No value on them, so you really scratch your head trying to work out which they are. Now, on the chip front, okay, chips, when you're removing them, sometimes have an earth connector, a ground connector on the underside of the chip that when it was put on, the solder gets melted to the underside of the chip from the board. This is one that can really get you if you're worried about getting an integrated circuit off the board. And I'll come on to how you take them off in a minute. Tantalum capacitors, these can be black or they can be the buff colour. Normally they're marked with their value and they're marked with a line showing the positive end. Electrolytics, these surface mount electrolytics are quite strange. Be careful. Check and double check the orientation of the positive and negative, because they mark the negative, and what you may think is the positive is often the negative. So yeah, be very, very careful. And the last thing I'm going to say is, when you're buying this stuff, you can't necessarily buy them in ones and twosies. You know, whereas you could in the old days go into Tandy's and in the UK Maplins and go, can I have 3 1K resistors or whatever you wanted? These are so small, I would guess that most manufacturers wouldn't want to sell you anything less than 10 of them. And sometimes they're like grains of sand. So, in fairness, don't skimp on buying more than you need, because when they're so small, when you open them, sometimes they just fly and you just won't never find them again if they're real small ones. That's if you decide to go there. Now, tools I would suggest you need for doing this type of work. Number 1, a good magnifying glass or a magnifying ring, preferably with lots of light. Something with a daylight bulb is absolutely great. I also wear magnifying glasses as well. So I'll use the magnifying lens. I'll also use magnifying glasses and get it in the right place and I to see what I'm doing. Now, hot air workstations. Yeah, hot air workstations are great, but they come in various prices. And you get to use them. I would suggest the number 1 recommendation here in doing surface mount work is to have non-metallic tools. There's nothing more frustrating than having a pair of tweezers and they've become magnetic, metal ones, and you go pick something up and the device sticks to your tweezers and then you're struggling with it to move it into the right position and all those sort of things. So non-metallic tools, certainly a good one. A soldering iron with a flat tip, and I'll come on to that later, but not everything gets re-put back on with a hot air gun. Plenty of flux. You need to make sure you have flux. In the old days, I used to just clean the boards up and use multi-core resin solder, which has got the flux in it, and it all soldered up nicely. Thank you very much. No, this sort of stuff, you need extra flux to make things flow and get things to work. Now, desoldering braid is something else that I never really liked in the old days for desoldering, but when you've removed a chip from a board, and or a device, and you're about to put a new device on, you don't want masses of old solder that can short out at a later date when you start putting the new component on. So what you do is put some flux onto the soldering braid, put your iron on top of the soldering blade and don't push too hard, but lightly run it over the pads, just so that you remove all of the old solder and get back to a nice clean surface. And that will certainly help, because if you're putting things down like a chip, if you've got a bulge of solder somewhere, it will hold the chip off and you'll get all sorts of bits and problems on that. Solder paste is useful in some devices to do things. You can put solder paste on, and I've also seen the videos where with a solder heat gun, as you spray it, it all jumps into place and marries up well. But the most tool that we all need is skill and luck. Now, I say skill and luck because, in fairness, what you're doing is, if you've got old PCBs or people throwing PCBs out, don't just chuck them out. Anything goes wrong in your house, grab the PCB and practice. Because if you're going to do any of this stuff, you might as well practice on a PCB board that's no good. And then when you have to, or if you have the ability to, repair something, you'll have practiced. And it's a bit like learning to drive or being a radio operator. The more you practice, the better you get at it, as I'm finding out, because surface mount wasn't something I was particularly good at. And last thing I was going to say is changing components. When you come to change components, you don't want too much heat. And if you're removing a chip, for argument's sake, you know, as I said, sometimes they're soldered underneath, so you've got all the leads around the outside, and they're grounded underneath. The best way to do it is not the way I thought to do it when I first started, is to run the heat round the pins. You need to run the heat onto the body of the IC. That warms up the whole device, and then you can pick once it's the solder's mounted, you can just pick the device off with a pair of tweezers. Now, you don't have to be quite forceful about it. If you just give it a little bit of a touch, when it's ready to go, it'll move and it'll flip off the board quite easily. But the other thing you really also need to know is you need to put reflectors, what I call reflectors, around other components you don't want the heat to get to. Now, this could be either professionally made bits of metal that have been bent into shape so that when you're trying to remove a particular chip, you don't put heat on everything else. It could be pieces of PCB, so you've got a bit of PCB just blocking the heat between two areas. Or you could use tinfoil, the metal tinfoil, and make a shape up you want just to reflect the heat away from other components. Don't use too much air when you're doing this. The classic is, let's blow lots of air on it quick and we get it off. No, bad news. If you do that, what will happen is you'll end up, as the solder mounts, components will either move or they'll just blow straight off the board and you'll lose them. So just be a little careful. Flux, once again, helps solder run. That's certainly good. And other components like resistors in tight areas. What you can do, and this is not very elegant, resistors and capacitors, if you're modifying or changing something, removing them, you put a blob of solder each end of the device and put your iron between the two blobs of solder, or oscillate your soldering arm left and right, and eventually the solder will melt and the surface mount component will come up onto your iron it will come up onto your iron. Now, that means it's totally rubbish, you won't use it again, but it's removed it easier rather than getting a hot air gun out. And putting them back, once again, make sure you got flux and solder, and then just put the iron on one end and tack one end, solder the other, and then come back and solder on. So, in fairness, a lot of what I've learnt in the last 3 months when I went back to work and everything's now surface mount, there's very, very little that is through-hole component. I grew up with through-hole components and tried to avoid surface mount all this time. I'm not very good at putting big chips back on the board. My colleague who I work with will put an 80-pin chip back onto the board with a soldering iron, resolder it with a soldering iron, and there's a technique for doing that. He puts loads of flux on it. He puts a little bit of solder on the iron, and he just runs the iron down the legs. And he just runs down the leg, looks at it. Any shorts, he then puts the iron on and pulls from the leg out to the rest of the board. And most times that works for him. And it works, but I can't do it. On my eyesight and my stability of the hand at the moment, I need far more practice. So what I'm saying is, told you about it. I'm not an expert on it. I'm sure some of you are. But for those of you who aren't, the thing is, have a look, decide whether you can or can't do this stuff, and decide whether you can work with a sizer component. And equally, grab old pieces of equipment that are being thrown out. It don't matter what they are. It really doesn't. Any PCB that's surface mount, have a practice. Remove components. Put them back on again. See what you find. And have fun. I hope this has been of interest.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
Well, everybody, I really hope you enjoyed our feature there, working with SMDs. And as always, we'd love to hear your feedback. And the best way you can do that is by visiting icqpodcast.com and send that feedback to us. Now, one of the ways of doing it is also to add comments to our news stories. And Sandip, EI7 India Juliet Bravo, did that a couple of episodes back. I think we were talking about Yaesu discontinuing models. And he adds a comment that the FT818 was well over his budget, but he was hoping to add this shack in a box to his QTH at some stage. And he does hope that Yaesu announces a new model this year. So usually new models are announced around the May-June time to coincide with Dayton and also the Friedrichshafen shows. We're certainly hoping to go to Friedrichshafen this year, and some of our American colleagues may be going to Dayton. So obviously we'll keep an eye out and see if there's anything announced there for you, Sandip, if you can't get to those shows, and bringing that news as quickly as we can. And I know, Deb, we've just been talking about potential travel plans to get to Friedrichshafen this year, but that's not the only show that we intend to go to, because we mentioned earlier on in the news in brief section the first show I think we're doing this year, which is the Hamzilla show, which is only in a couple of months' time, which I know is a show you enjoy going to as well, Dad.
Yeah, I certainly enjoy Hamzilla, and we're planning to be out there. But I'm also doing the rally, Canby Island rally on the 5th of February. So there are some ICQ presenters going to that one as well, Colin. So it starts early in the UK, and the Canby Island rally, I thoroughly enjoyed it when we did it a couple of years ago. So looking forward to that one as well, Colin. But Friedrichshafen, yeah, the plan is Mrs. B may also come, and she's been there before. So, yeah, she might be along doing her boss's role, as she refers to, Colin.
Exactly. I wonder if that means she'll be taking us out for fine German beers and all sorts of stuff like that. We'll have to see if we've been good boys and we're going to be looked after in the evening after a hard day of interviewing and recording, and find out what's going on in the hobby. So we'll certainly see how that goes from there. Right, well, as always, we'd like to thank everybody who helped us do this episode this week. So we'd like to thank Chris, Mike Zero Tango Charlie Hotel, Martin, Mike Zero Sierra Golf Lima, Frank, Kilo 4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel, and Leslie, Golf Zero Charlie India Bravo. We'd also like to wish Bill Barnes a speedy recovery from his operation, and as I say, really hope you're back with us again in quick time, and your recovery goes well. So look after yourself, my friend, and as I say, make sure you get yourself well again as fast as possible. Right, well, I just think that just about rounds up everything for this episode number 394 of the ICQ podcast. All that's left now, I think, for us to do is to wish everybody 73s and, importantly, make Mrs. B there a cup of tea and find her a nice chocolate biscuit.
Yeah, I'm going to do that, Colin, shortly. Go make that tea and raid the biscuit tin for her. That'll be great. And Bill, get well soon. We do understand why. And just for those of you worried, I will tell you what happened to Bill. He unfortunately broke his wrist rather badly in a radio amateur way. He was throwing a weight up into a tree connected to a rope and overextended himself, fell and tried to stop himself falling and broke his wrist. So get well, Bill. As I say, not life-threatening, but a horrible injury all the same. And I suppose we should have known it was going to be done by amateur radio, Bill. Hi. Get well soon, mate. No problems. Back to you, Colin.
Exactly. So we'll bid 73s to you all, and we'll look forward to catching you again in a fortnight's time. 73s.
Yeah, 73.